The goal of this video is to teach you everything you need to know to be a React developer in the shortest amount of time. I timed it out. The tutorial ended up being about 39 minutes long. So in 39 minutes, you should know everything you need to know to get started as a React developer. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon. Let's get started. The first thing you'll want to make sure you have on your computer is Node.js. You can go to this link. I'll put all these links in the description below. Make sure to download the LTS version. It's always safest to download the LTS version instead of the current version. The current version is usually not safe to have in production because a lot of times it's not compatible with all the packages in the NPM library. Once you've installed Node.js on your computer, you can open up a terminal and then you can go to the directory that you would like. The way you can do that is by saying, well, first I'll say ls. If you say ls on a Mac, this shows you what files, what folders are on your computer. You can say cd into your documents, and then you can see which folder you want to go into. I'm going to cd into my YouTube tutorials folder. Once you're in your folder of choice, you can say npx create react app, and then after that, name the app whatever you'd like. I'm going to say my React to-do list. Click return. Okay, and once it's finished creating your React app, it should look something like this. You can then open up your code editor of choice. I like Visual Studio Code. Once you've opened up your code editor, you can go File, Open. Find the folder that you just created, the React app. Just click on the whole folder, click open. Before we move on to actually building our React app, I just wanted to take a little bit of time to explain what is a React app, how does it work. This is things I wish I would have been taught when I first learned React. If you look in the public file, there's something called index.html. You can open that up. What you'll notice is this is just a standard HTML file. The way React works is React is called a single page application. So what is happening is React is loading the entire app, your whole app, all on this index.html page. And what you can see down here where it says div ID root, what React is doing is all the code that you add into this app.js file, all the future code, it's going to be basically putting it all together, and it's going to replace this div ID root with your whole app on this one page. And if you go into your source file and go down to index.js, you can kind of see how that's working too. So it's saying, look for the document element root. In place of that root, what you should render is the app. The app can be found if you go up one layer to app.js. And so it's returning this app.js screen. And the biggest thing to know here with React, so that it all makes sense too, is all React is it's kind of a fancy way to return HTML code. You'll notice down here, this function, this app function, it's just returning HTML code. It's written a little different with like class names and stuff like that. It's called JSX technically, but basically what it's doing is it makes it easy to return HTML code onto this one page, this index.html file. And that's basically how React works. The last thing I'll say here is a big thing, reason why you should remember this is because of your styling. Even if you add more than one CSS file. Currently, there's one CSS file called app.css, and we'll get more into this later. But even if you add more, like you create a home screen or something and you add home.css, what's really happening is all of those CSS files are still on this one index.html page. So my point is basically you always will only have one CSS page in your entire app. Even if you create other functions, other CSS files, all those CSS files are in this one page. And so if you accidentally name the CSS one thing in one CSS file, and then you accidentally use that same name in another CSS file, just mess everything up. And again, I'll go more into this in a little bit, but I just wanted you to be able to visualize what exactly is going on. How is this actually working? And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and get into some code. So we're going to create a simple to-do app. Like I said before, this app.js file is what the program is looking for. So this is what's going to be showing up on the page first. Just so you can go ahead and see what your app looks like, you can go to the top of the screen where it says terminal, click new terminal, and that should open up something like this. You can just say npm start, and this will open your app up on a browser. All right, and this is your React app. This is what it currently looks like. Before we move on, we'll go ahead and open up this app.css file. You can click this to split screen option, and that'll bring it up over here. When I'm coding, I usually like to have the app.css file over here while I'm coding over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete all of this, and I'm just going to create something called app with a lowercase app. And I'm going to go ahead and lowercase the app here. And I'm going to delete everything within this div. We're going to start from scratch. What I like to do with this app class, I like to give it a min height, 100 view height. This will just make sure the screen's always at least 100% the view height. I also like to say width, 100 view width. So this will make sure the width is guaranteed to be 100% of the screen. And another big thing I like to always just go ahead and do is say overflow X hidden. What this overflow X hidden will do is it'll guarantee that you'll never accidentally create something that's more than 100% of the width. And if it does, it won't allow you to scoot over to the right of the screen. You may have noticed that with some websites, you may have accidentally been able to scoot over to the right of the screen. This just guarantees that that won't ever happen. It'll just always stay 100% the width of the screen. Now, the way I like to style, just so things aren't confusing, is I like to keep everything on the app.css page if it's not a very complex app. If it is, you may want to expand from there. You may actually want to use something else like CSS modules or something like that. But the reason I like to keep it all on the app.css page is, again, this helps it not be confusing, because no matter how many CSS pages you create, it's all basically one CSS page anyway. So the way instead to keep it organized is underneath the app, I'll go ahead and put in a note, give the name of the CSS pages so that we can stay organized. There's going to be 2 pages in this app. The first is home. So I'll say home CSS, and then I'll go down, make another note and say ChosenTask CSS. And these will be pages we create in a second. So from now on, if there's any styling specific to home, I'll put it here. Specific to ChosenTask, I'll put it here. And then at the top here, I'll say global CSS. So this lets me know any global styling that should be applicable to the entire app. I'll put here under the app class. All right, and so let's go ahead and get to the app.js file. In the app.js file, I like to create what I call a global state. This is where we're going to have our global state management using hooks, and I'll show you how that works in a second. The next thing we'll be creating is navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this logo because we're not using it anymore. And I want to use hooks in this app. So I'm going to import use state from hooks, and we'll go ahead and create our global state. So the way global state works is we create hooks for all the variables we want to be accessible on all of the screens first. I'm going to go ahead and create some variables here. The first one, I'm going to call it to-do list. And if you're not sure how hooks works, this first option here is the name of the variable, the name of the state. Then you put a comma there. And the second variable is the name of the function you want to use to update state. So I'll say set to-do list, and then you can say equals use state. And within this use state function, you say what kind of variable you want it to be. In our case, it's going to be an array. We're going to have an array of objects in here. And I'm going to go ahead and put some dummy data in here. So I'll put an object, and in that object, I want each object to have an ID. And the second is going to be a task. And I'm just going to say go to bed. The second variable I want to create is called task. And I'll say set task is the name of the function that will update this state. Again, I'll say use state. And I want this to be an empty string starting out. This is going to be a string value. The last variable is going to be called ChosenTask. What's going to happen is whenever someone clicks on a task in the to-do list, it'll go to a different screen called the ChosenTask screen, and it'll display the value of the chosen task. So I'll say ChosenTask, set ChosenTask, and I'll say use state, and I'll say this is an object. Just put it as an empty object. And this is how the global state works. You say const global state, and it's an object. Within that object, you just copy the names of these variables and functions, these hook variables and functions into global state. And then next we're going to create navigation. And once that's done, we're going to pass this global state down as a prop into each page so that each page has access to the state that we want accessible on all of the pages, the global state. All right, so for navigation, you'll want to open up another terminal. You can click this split screen option here. It'll open up another terminal. In there, you can say npm install. We're going to use React router DOM. You can click return. All right, and then up here under use state, I'm going to import. I'll create an object and I'll click enter. And we'll say browser router as router. And what this is saying is we're going to use this variable, but whenever we reference browser router down here, we're just going to reference it as router, and it'll really be accessing this browser router. The next thing is called routes. The last thing is called route. And then we'll say from React router DOM, and we'll be using this to create our navigation. So we can go ahead and come in here inside of the app class, the app div. The first thing you'll want to do is say router, use this router component. Within that, there's something called routes. We're going to use that component, and you'll want to keep those the same. Within here is where we're going to be putting our routes. This is how we're going to be creating the URLs for each of our screens. So you'll want to say route. The first thing you want to say is path. Since this is our home path, you can just put a slash. And the next thing you'll say is element equals an object. And within that object, you can just say home as the component. We're going to create this component in a little bit. But for now, you can just say home. And then you can do a self-closing tag. And before we move on, since we have a component here, we can go ahead and pass down global state as a prop by saying global state equals global state. And then we'll be able to access this on the next screen. And if this is your very first time learning React and this doesn't make a lot of sense yet, just bear with me. It'll start making sense the more you're able to see on the screen. But if you just follow along, by the end of the video, it should all make more sense. You'll understand how everything works. And so I'm sorry if this is a little complicated, but hopefully it makes sense after you're finished with the video. All right, so that's, we went ahead and created our first page, which we'll create this component in a little bit. The second page we want to create, so we'll say route and path. There's going to be a screen called the ChosenTask screen. So you can say slash chosen dash task. And then whenever someone goes to your website, whatever.com slash ChosenTask, it would open up the ChosenTask screen. In there, we'll say element equals object again. And within there, we're going to create something called ChosenTask, a screen called ChosenTask. We'll go ahead and put global state in there as well. We'll put a backtick there. So this is a self-closing tag. And then you'll want to go after this last curly brace and put another self-closing tag there. So I think our app.js screen is finished. We have our global state finished, our routes finished. And now we'll go ahead and start creating our app, what you see on the screen. You can click this Explorer up here. The first thing you'll want to do is in this source folder, click to create a folder. You can call it pages. Within pages, this is where we're going to put our home page and our chosen task page. So you'll want to go to pages, create a file, just call it home.js. Create another file, call it ChosenTask.js. So before we move on, just to explain again what's happening, this app.js screen, this is the first thing that the app is going to look at. It's going to be looking here to see what kind of HTML should be returned first. Well, if you look down in the path, whenever someone first goes to the website, this route is set to open up this screen first. And so we'll go ahead and just create something super simple so you see what's going on. So to create a new function, a new page, you just say export default function and name it whatever you'd like. I'm going to name it home. And if you need a reference to know what a function should look like, you can just go back to your app.js file, see how they wrote it here. With here, they do it this way. They say function app, and then the curly braces, and then the export default app. But they could have done it this way. You don't have to do it this way. You could delete that and just say export default function, make it all one line. That would work too. And so that's how we'll do it. So we'll say export default function home, and then put the curly braces. And you can just for simplicity's sake, we could say return, I'll say an H1 tag that says home page. And then the way to get this to show up, you'll need to go back to your app.js file. And at the top here, what we're going to have to do now is import the home screen and the chosen task screen so that they can be used in this routing feature. So we'll go up here and say import. You can just say home and say from quotations, and you just say / to see anything that's on the same level as your app.js screen, which is within this source file. You can go down to pages and then do another / go down to home. And since we're here, we'll go ahead and import our chosen task screen too from say / pages chosen task. And now if we go back to our screen that we opened up, it should say home page. Let's see. All right. And so I went back here, I refreshed the page, and as you can see, there's the home page screen. So as you can see, it's as simple as that. It's just basically returning HTML. And the way you would do that is by just creating a function that returns HTML this way. So let's go ahead and start building out the home screen. The first thing I want to do is to import something called useNavigate, and just say useNavigate. And it's from React Router DOM. This is the function that's used to navigate between pages. Within the home function, near the top, you can say const navigate equals useNavigate. And navigate is a function that you would trigger. And so from then on this page, whenever we want to navigate somewhere, we can just say navigate. And then within that function, we can say string / chosen task, or whatever name you give the path in your navigation screen. So I'll go ahead and delete that. The next thing I want to bring in is this global state. So we just pass down global state, all these variables as a prop into the page. So the way you would access those is on the screen, like the home function, you would put inside of here where the parameters go, you put an object, curly braces, you would say global state. So this is importing this global state object. And under there, I'm only going to bring in the ones I want to use for this screen. So to do that, we can deconstruct it. So say const, put an object here, and the first thing I want is the to-do list. The second thing I want is the set to-do list so that we can update the to-do list. Then I want task, set task. The last thing I want is set chosen task. And then after that, you can say equals global state. And that will give us access to these variables that are housed in our global state up here. Under navigate, I'm going to create a couple functions that I'll explain a little bit later. You can just follow along. The first function I'm going to create is called handle submit. And what we're creating is called an arrow function. So the way you create it is you would say const the name of the function equals braces equals greater than sign. So you'll notice it looks like an arrow. Curly braces. This is for submitting a new task that will be typed into an input. The first thing I want is an ID, and I'm going to create a unique ID by measuring the length of the to-do list and adding 1 to it. So I'll say to-do list.length plus 1. The next thing I want to do is say set to-do list. So again, this set to-do list function will update to the to-do list. I'm going to show you how to use a spread operator inside of a hook function so that you can add to the list instead of just replacing it. So to do that, you could say something like prev state, which stands for the previous state, do another arrow function, and then put brackets, say dot, 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 prev state. This will guarantee that whatever is currently the value of the to-do list will be placed up front. And then after that, you'll want to put curly braces. We're going to put an object here. We want our ID to be this ID and the task within there to be the task that we'll set in a little bit. We'll put an input in the return statement, and that's where we're going to get the value of task. And the last thing we'll want to do is say set task. We'll want to set the task back to an empty string. And again, you'll see why in a little bit. The next function I want to create is called handle ChosenTask, and we'll make this another arrow function. The first thing we'll want to do is set the chosen task. And for this, we're going to actually pass in a parameter and we'll just call it E for element. And then we'll set the chosen task to E as well. And then within here is where we're going to be using this navigate function that we just created up there. They navigate strings slash chosen task, which is what we put as the path here. And what we're going to end up doing is on the chosen task screen, we're going to show the value of the task in the chosen task that we just set in this function, handle choose task. All right, and we'll go ahead and update the return statement. Let's go ahead and delete this and put braces. We'll create a div and give it a class name, which you'll notice in React, the class, instead of just saying class, you should say class name. We'll call it home page and go ahead and close that out. The first thing I'm going to create is called input. Within input, you can say value. I'm going to make the value of this input be the task, which currently it's an empty string that we put here in the global state. And then there's something in input called onChange. What this is going to do is trigger this function while someone's typing into the input. We'll say equals, put curly braces, say event, and then make that be an arrow function. You can say set task, and it's important here. Within the task, you'll say event.target.value. What this will do is it'll take the value of whatever the user's typing into the input, and it'll set that text as the value that goes within this set task function. And so as it's doing that, it'll be updating the value of this task variable. The last thing we'll put here is a placeholder. And in that placeholder, I'll just say new task, ... to let them know this is where you should be putting the new task. And then I'll close out the tag. The next thing I'll put is a button. So you can just say button. And within that button, I'm just going to put an on-click event and make sure you put braces, create an arrow function in there. And this is where I'm going to handle the submit. This is where I want to trigger this handle submit function. After that, close it out. And within the button, just say submit. Under that, I'm going to put an H2 tag. I'm going to say to-do list. And under that, this is where I want the to-do list to show. What we're going to do here is we're going to use JavaScript inside of our return function, which is another cool thing about React. If you want to use JavaScript, all you have to do is put curly braces and then put the JavaScript. In like HTML, normally you would put something like a script tag and then go through that whole process of using JavaScript in HTML. Well, React makes it easy to use JavaScript. You just put curly braces here, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a map function to return the to-do list. So to do that, I'm going to say this to-do list, which is this array of objects that we created in the global state in the app.js file. I'll say to-do list dot map. Within that, I'll say E, which just is short for element. Create an arrow function. Within there, I'm going to return, and I'll put these braces. And what I'm going to return is a div. I'm going to give it a class name because I want to style it of task. And in a map function, you want to make sure to give each object a key value. If you don't do it, React will give you a bunch of error messages. So you want to make sure to put a key. And for the value of that key, I'm going to say e.id. I'm going to use the ID of each individual object within this to-do list array as the key. And I'll go ahead and make it like this so it's a bit easier to see. The last thing I'll put in this div is an on-click event. So what this will do is whenever the user taps on the task, it'll trigger this function. Put curly braces, make this an arrow function, and just say handle choose task. Within that, we'll put this E, this element, which is the object within the to-do list that's currently being looped through. It'll use that to set the chosen task up here in this handle choose task function. And then we'll go ahead and close that. And down here, we'll put /div. And within here, we'll again, we want to use JavaScript again. And so we'll say e.task. We want to return the value of this object .task here as just plain text. And there we go. We should be able to see this task on the screen. Let's go see. We'll refresh the page. And sometimes if the page is unresponsive, there may have been so many changes. You could just say wait, or you can come back here to your terminal, click Control-C to close the terminal, and then just say npm start again. And this should open it up correctly. And sometimes you'll even just have to completely close the browser. That's what I just had to do. Open up the browser again, say npm start, and then it went ahead and showed it. So as you'll see, it has our input that we just created with new task. Here, I'll make this bigger. The submit button we just added, the to-do list, and let's see if it works. I'll just say test, submit, and there we go. It's showing up on the screen down there. And let's go ahead and make this go back to 100%. We'll go ahead and style this page a little bit before moving on to the chosen task screen. So the first thing I want to do is add some styling to the home page. Under this homepage CSS, I'm going to put the homepage class, and I want to use flexbox. So I'm going to say display flex. I'm going to say flex direction column because I want the items to be top to bottom instead of left to right. And I'll say align items center, and then I'll give it a margin top of 100 pixels. Okay, that's starting to look better. The next thing I want to do is just style the input and the button globally. The way you can do that is just come down here. You don't have to put a dot. You can just say input, and then this will style all the inputs globally on the website. I'm going to give it a width of 500 pixels. I'll say padding, and if you give padding two values, the first value is top and bottom. The second value is left and right. So I'm going to say top to bottom, I want to be 15 pixels. Left and right, I want the padding to be 10 pixels. It's important to say in CSS, whenever you're using padding, it's good to say box sizing border box. What this will do is it'll make sure if you add padding to a box, it's not going to increase the width of the box to say 530 instead of just 500. It'll add the padding, but it'll keep the width the same set width of like what we have, 500. The next thing I'm going to create is a border. I'm going to make the border be 1 pixel. I'll say for the color, I'm going to say 818181, and I'm going to say solid so that it's a solid border. I'll say border radius is the next thing I'll add. I'll say 12 pixels. Then I'm going to add a box shadow. And the way box shadow works, I sometimes have to look it up just to remember. I'll put this link in the description below too, but it also shows, so the first option is the H offset. The second option is the V offset. Third option is blur. Fourth option is spread. So a lot of times I'll just put 0, 0 for the first two options. The third option is how blurry do you want the color to be. The fourth option is how wide do you want the shadow to be. And so I just want to add some blur. So I'm going to say 3 pixels, and I'll say the color is 818181 again for the shadow. And then I want to give the input a margin bottom of 15 pixels. All right, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, okay, I'm starting to like it. So I think I actually might like this without a border at all. So if you don't want a border, you'll have to specify 0. And then I'm going to see what it looks like for the blur to be 5. Okay, let me switch it to 4. Okay, yeah, I think I like that the best. All right, and the next thing I want to go ahead and style globally is button. So I'm just going to say button, and this will style all the buttons this way. I'm going to go ahead and copy the input styling, paste it in the button so it looks about the same. There's going to be some additions. I'm going to add a background color, and I'll make it this 818181 color, and I'll update the color, which is text color. I'll say white, and then I'll go ahead and give the font of the text a font weight of 900. And the last thing I'll do is I'll increase the size of the font. I'll say font size 20 pixels. See what that looks like. Oh, before we move on, the last thing I've wanted to add to button is cursor pointer. It bugs me when there's not a little pointer whenever you hover over a button. So now you can see it turns the mouse into a little finger, so you know it's clickable. All right, so the last thing to style on this page is the task. So I'm going to say dot task under the home CSS, and I'm going to copy the button styling. Go ahead and put that in as the task. And I'm going to delete this background color, maybe switch font weight to 700. All right, yeah, I think that looks better. So we'll go ahead and move on to create the chosen task screen. We'll first go ahead and just say export default function chosen task. And within here, we'll just say return h1 tag chosen task screen. And let's make sure our navigation is working. So you'll remember, let's go back to our home screen. Each task, we're attaching this function handle choose task. And so we want to make sure it'll trigger this function, which should take us to the chosen task screen. So let's see if that works. And it does. It took us to the chosen task screen. And you'll notice up here in the URL, it updated the URL to add chosen task. And then if you took that out and click return, it takes us back to the home screen. All right, so the last thing we want to do is we want the name of the task to show up on the chosen task screen. So let's go ahead and come here to chosen task. Let's import a few things. I want to go ahead and show you some another thing called useEffect. It's used for hooks. This is an important function that you'll find useful as you create React apps. It allows you to trigger a function after the screen has already rendered. So it'll return everything, and then it'll trigger the useEffect function. And I'll just show you how that works. So first thing, let's go ahead and import. I want to import both useState and useEffect. And this useState and useEffect are the main functions you'll be using with React for hooks. So these are the really important ones that you want to know. Say from React. Under there, I want to import the useNavigate again so that we can navigate back to the home screen. And that's from the React Router DOM. Let's go ahead and import our global state. Again, you put curly braces there, say global state. Under there, you can say const. And the only thing I want to import is the chosen task. First should be lowercase. It is case sensitive. And I'll say equals global state. And let's go ahead and create our navigate function. So say navigate equals useNavigate triggered. And under there, we're going to create a new hook just for this page. I'm going to call the variable my chosen task and say set my chosen task as the name of the function used to update the state. And here I'll say use state. And within that, I'll just make it an empty object. And then under there, this is where we're going to use useEffect. So to use useEffect, you can just type out the word useEffect, trigger it. Within it, you can just put an arrow function. So braces, arrow function. A big important thing here is if you just leave it like this, useEffect is going to trigger every single time anything updates with state. So if you were to put like an input on this screen and start typing into the input, useEffect would trigger over and over and over again. If you don't want that to happen, if you just want useEffect to trigger one time, after the curly braces here, put a comma and then put an empty array. If you do this, this lets React know that whenever you trigger the ChosenTask function, only trigger this useEffect one time. So that's really important. If you don't do that, it can cause an infinite loop. You may find that your page is triggering over and over and over and over again, and you have no idea what's going on. Well, you just need to always make sure to put a comma, empty brackets there, if you just want this to trigger one time. Another thing is if you want the useEffect to trigger not just one time, but maybe anytime a variable changes. So say what we want to do is use useEffect anytime ChosenTask is updated. Well, you could put that variable in there, and then what this is going to do is it's only going to trigger this useEffect function whenever the value of ChosenTask changes. And if the value of ChosenTask does not change, it won't trigger useEffect. So that's another cool thing about useEffect. You can tell it to trigger something within it each time the value of a variable changes. But we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to put an empty array for now because we just want this to trigger one time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my ChosenTask here to the value of the ChosenTask imported from GlobalState. I'll put that there. So let's come back here. We'll delete this. We'll put braces again, and we'll say div with a class name of ChosenTask page. And within that, we'll put a button that on click. For this one, we're going to put an arrow function, and we just want to navigate back home whenever this is clicked. So we'll say navigate, and you can just put a string with a slash so that it'll go back home. And within the button, we'll say go back home. Under that, we'll put an H2 tag called ChosenTask. And then under ChosenTask, we'll go ahead and just put a P tag. And within there, this is important. We're going to be using something called a conditional operator. Whenever you're using JavaScript inside of a return function, it won't let you use like an if statement. So you'll need to use something called a conditional operator. The way this works is I'm going to say my chosen task, and you'll put a question mark and then a colon. And what this is doing is it's checking, is my chosen task truthy or falsy? If it's truthy, return whatever is right after the question mark. So I'll say truthy here. If it's falsy, return whatever is after the colon. To simplify this, so an object, that's a truthy value. And so this is actually going to return truthy no matter what. So the way we're going to check if this my chosen task has what we want in it is we're going to say my chosen task dot task. This will check to see is there a task value inside of the object that's in my chosen task. If there is, what we want to return is my chosen task dot task. If there is not, if it's falsy, we want to return nothing. We just want to return null. And so this is how you can kind of use an if statement in the return function for React. Okay, and I'm getting an error that says navigate is not defined. I forgot to put an E at the end of navigate. That should fix that. before we move on, I'm going to style this chosen task page. I'm going to come up here to home page. I'm going to copy this whole thing. I'll paste that there and I'll change the name to chosen task page. So let's see what that looks like. All right, there we go. Congratulations, you finished a React to-do list. If you like learning about React, I'm planning on coming out with some more portfolio-worthy projects using React. So you'll want to make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon to be notified. Also, if you're interested in learning about React Native, I put together a course on how to learn React Native in 47 minutes. You can watch this video right here to learn more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.